From for us today is a sequel of the lesson that we learned on this poem, The Guilt of Giving by Laban Erapu. This Laban Erapu is a Ugandan who wrote this poem looking at what happens. You know, literature is a reflection of society. And being a reflection of society, it is important for us to know that these things happen within our midst, in our own setups. They do happen. So, having done some analysis of this poem in our last lesson, today I want to look at the typical exam questions. The typical exam questions that are set not only on this poem is only going to be an example of the typical exam questions based on this poem. But first, as usual, we have to read. You've seen that heap of rags that pollutes the air-conditioned city center? That louse that creeps about in the clean corpse of sophistication? You've seen him waylay his betters and make them start, especially when they have no change. You recall the day you came upon him and you were startled by his silent presence, now intruding into your preoccupation. You held a coin which missed the mark and rolled into the gutter where I groped for it with a chilling, grotesque gratitude that followed you down the street. You dived into the nearest shop to escape the stare of the scandalized crowd that found you guilty of recalling attention to the impenetrable patience they had learned not to see. If you read like that, you will miss something. But if you are slower a bit, you've seen that heap of rags that pollutes the air-conditioned city center? That louse that creeps about in the clean corpse of sophistication. You've seen him waylay his betters. Betters are those things that he has. One has a guitar, the other one has a radio, the other one has a drum. There is another who has a tin. He's beating the tin to draw their attention, to make them start, especially when they have no change. You know, those people who are walking about in the streets, like throwing the coins. When they don't have change, they just go. You don't have them come to you for the money, to give the money. They just go. But to draw their attention, he'll make his betters, his possessions start, especially when they have no change. You recall the day you came upon him. That is the introduction of now a character. The audience being referred to as you. But that audience is again a character in the poem. You recall the day you came upon him and was startled by his silent presence, now intruding into your preoccupation. You held a coin which missed the mark and rolled into the gutter where he groped for it with a chilling, grotesque gratitude. Yesterday we saw grotesque gratitude, unusual, strange, bizarre. Most of them don't give gratitude when you give them this money. But now that he is groping for it, there is need to give gratitude. Why did you miss the mark? Probably you are very new in this city, or in that city, where I groped for it with a chilling, grotesque gratitude that followed you down the street. You dived into the nearest shop to escape the stare of the scandalized crowd. That the crowd at that street has been scandalized. Oh, what is this man doing? They have found you guilty of recalling attention to the impenetrable patience they had learned not to see. This beggar has been there one day too many. This beggar has been there. Now, my question is, typical exam questions. These are typical exam questions. The main instruction is read the article below and answer the questions that follow. We shall go straight to the first question. Who is the persona in the poem? Who is the persona in the poem? Persona, we said, you get the baseline. The bottom line is that the persona is the voice in the poem. And then it requires you to identify that voice. In other words, whose voice is this in the poem? So you don't go about saying the persona is the voice in the poem. No, that's wrong. You have to identify whose voice that is in the poem. An observer, persona. Observer, an observer, an onlooker, you can say that, a meditator, from the word meditate, a meditator, a bystander, a bystander in a city street. All these are possible answers to that question. Who is the persona in this poem? Who is the persona in this poem? Yesterday we looked at the parameters. How do we find the persona in the poem? Yeah. The second question obviously will be, what is the subject matter? What is the subject matter? This question can be paraphrased as, that is question number 2, what is the poem talking about? I told you there are 2 ways of going about it. One, you can say the poem is talking about oppression. The poem is talking about poverty. The poem is talking about racial discrimination. The poem is talking about women empowerment. You see, those are phrases, and then we have the nouns, especially the abstract nouns. That is going according to the first criteria, which is thematic approach. You are approaching the subject matter from the point of view of themes, thematic approach. We talk about poverty, that is a theme. We talk about racial discrimination, that's a theme. But here in this poem, I didn't look at it like that. I looked at it as from the plot analysis. Plot. You analyze what is the story in the poem. What is the story in the poem. One more thing you need to understand. Always, this is the main instruction. Always paraphrase the subject matter, because Even if you are going to say, even if you are using the thematic approach by saying the poem talks about poverty, you are going to say something about it. What is this that the poem is saying about poverty? You have to say something. You can't say it talks about child abuse and then you walk away. No, to another question. There is something you are going to say, and I warn you, you will not quote. Do not quote. Always paraphrase. Say the same thing in your own words. Do not distort the meaning. For example, you can say, the poem is about a beggar in a city street whose filth in the modernity of the city is out of place. The people have learned to ignore the beggar. The beggar is about the poem is about a beggar in a city street. So here, if you follow what I'm telling you, the poem is about a beggar. I want to tell you where the examiner gives you the glimmer. You talk about beggar with the correct spelling. Here, the examiner gives you that glimmer. In a city street. In a city street. This one here, the examiner gives you a glimmer. Whose filth in the modernity of the city, whose filth? Filth. The examiner gives you a glimmer here. The modernity of the what? Of the city is out of place, is unwanted. Is unwanted. Unwanted. The examiner gives you a glimmer there, and the people of the city have since decided to ignore. The examiner gives you a glimmer here. So, if this question had 2 marks, and this is half, you have 1 extra. So it means you are within the bracket. If this question was 2 marks, then you are within the bracket. What is the poem talking about? So you say, the poem is talking about a beggar in a city street whose filth in the modernity of the city is unwanted. The people have since decided to ignore. You can even go further and say, you, probably a stranger in the city, arrives and throws a coin. That depends on how many marks are. It could be 3 marks. You, probably a stranger in the city, arrives and throws a coin. The beggar and the beggar in the process reminds the people in the street what they have always learned to ignore. So that is where you bring the you. Because the theme or the subject matter of this poem does not end with the beggar and the heap of rags and the louse and the creeping about in the clean core of sophistication and the city center. No. The poem draws you to another person. You recall the day you came upon him and you were startled by his silent presence, now intruding into your preoccupation. You remember you are the you who threw the coin, which missed the mark and rolled into the gutter where he groped for it. In the next part, we shall look at the third typical exam question. See you then.